Assalamu alaikum. I am your host Salim bin Muhammad Rafi, and here is my YouTube channel Zamir Universal. Today I am going to talk to you about civilization. How civilized we are, no matter how educated, whether we are Doctor of Science or Doctor of Philosophy, PhD, or we are a Nobel laureate and who has spent all his life teaching and working in the research laboratories and have creating from electricity bulb to what we have today, that we can now talk to each other from thousands of miles. We can see each other's picture, and we can even now with artificial intelligence and holograph, if we can create a situation which is very much like a living thing. We have come a long way, but unfortunately, when I hear the word about Western civilization, and I used to be impressed and felt that I should go to West to be civilized, as I was in some uncivilized situation, and it was absolutely this dream was like a nightmare, and I was woken up with this when I saw how the Western civilization was. And I will just put some evidence and some other speakers with evidence that they are not civilized. Unfortunately, they are worse than civilized. They are bloodsuckers, they are vampires, they are everything. They are terrorists, they are traitors, and they are war criminals. They are criminals of babies, they are criminals of women, they are criminals of patients, they are criminals who go into the operation theaters and kill the helpless patients who've been operated freshly, but directly hitting on their head. They kill even the people who provide food to the needy. And recently you have seen that they, amongst these civilized, so-called civilization, to which a mentally deranged person is now calling and is on one side of the scale, and the rest of the world is on that. And see the helplessness of the same civilized country, the president of that superpower, of that great civilized nation called America. You will see for yourself and decide how ignorant, how cruel, how callous. There is every smallest word one can use for this, and I will just produce both the people who are neutral, qualified, and they know what civilization means and what human rights basic means, what is how you live with each other, like just in a family. It's not might is right, otherwise the father will just can kill the wife or the children, the one he doesn't like, and then that will be the rule of jungle. And that's what is happening presently at the moment in the West, so-called the Western civilizations. They should learn from other civilizations, and I think we are reverting back to the animal age. And the typical example is this mentally deranged, schizophrenic, megalomaniac, paranoid Netanyahu, who has now put on one side of the scale the piece of the whole world, and the one person who is not even listening to your president. So where do you put that president who has no say? You just like his face, you like that he just went through a process which is all just an illusion. And that's what I'm going to say with after this short introduction, to come right to the point.
I think what he's doing is a mistake. I don't agree with his approach. I think it's outrageous that those three vehicles were hit by drones and taken out on a highway where it wasn't like it was along the shore. It wasn't like there was a convoy moving there, etc. So what I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire, allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country. I've spoken with everyone from the Saudis to the Jordanians to the Egyptians. They're prepared to move in. They're prepared to move this food in. And I think there's no excuse to not provide for the medical and the food needs of those people. They should be done now.
Dear citizens of America, here's some stuff that you really need to know. First of all, Jews make up less than 2% of the population of your country, but they hold every senior level cabinet position in the Biden administration except Secretary of Defense. I mean, just look at this list. And you have to ask yourself, are these people after your best interests? Are they going to do what's best for America, or are they going to do what's best for Israel? You see, the whole world knows the reality that Israel treats America like a farm. They treat you guys like cattle, like farm animals. Every single hardworking American works every day and pays their taxes. Those taxes are supposed to go to improving America and making the country better for you and your children. But instead, that money is sent overseas to Israel. America gives more aid to Israel than any other country. In 1999, the US government signed an MOU saying that they were going to pay a minimum of $2.67 billion annually for Israel for the next 10 years. That number was increased in 2009 and increased again in 2019, and now as a minimum, Israel gets $3.8 billion from the US every single year. That's $3.8 billion a year of your money, your tax money, that should be providing you with health care, should be providing you with a college education, but is not doing any of those things. Now, in addition to financial and military aid, the US also provides a lot of political support to Israel, as we've all seen. It used its veto power 42 times against resolutions condemning Israel. Now, the veto power was used a total of 83 times. 42 of those were used to protect Israel. That's more than half. So if I was an American, I would be asking myself, why am I living on this farm? Why am I allowing myself to work and sweat for my entire lifetime, as well as everyone I know and love, as well as all my children, just to send all of this money and support away to Israel?
Over 200 humanitarian aid workers have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. We're joined by the executive director of Doctors Without Borders in the U.S., Avril Benoit. She joins us from New York City. And Save the Children President Yanti Saripto is back with us here in Washington. And I want to say condolences to both of you and your organizations for the workers that you've lost in this conflict. And I appreciate you being here with us. Yanti Saripto, you testified before the UN just this week about this ongoing problem. You said more children have been killed in this conflict than have been killed in all armed conflicts globally every year over the past 4 years.
Yeah, I know, Margaret. It sounds almost unbelievable when you say it out loud. And
it's horrific.
It is horrific, and it is. And people stop hearing, I think, when we hear all those numbers, thousands, and they forget that behind all those thousands there is a child and their families behind it.
Children. And Avril Benoit, I want to go to you on this because you and the people who you work with provide help, medical aid to those who are injured, who might be able to survive what is happening there. I want to ask you why you think we've seen this outcry this week in the wake of the killing of the 7 World Central Kitchen workers, including an American. But we didn't hear the same after 225 aid workers were killed. Why do you think that is?
It certainly warrants an outcry, and it warrants an outcry every time these things happen. Not only have we seen so many civilians killed and injured, 33,000 killed, roughly 75,000 people injured, and it's proportionate to the population. So that in terms of the number of children, women who are injured and killed, it's very matching. And so you ask yourself, is this a war against Hamas or a war against civilians? And among the civilians, we also have a pattern of attacks against journalists. And we see a pattern also of attacks against aid workers who are there to do nothing more than alleviate suffering and save lives. In our case, Doctors Without Borders has lost 5 colleagues. And they were in situations, in some cases, where they were literally at the bedside of patients in hospitals when they were killed.
I'll be less diplomatic. Do you think that there was an outcry because these weren't Westerners?
No doubt, the fact that World Central Kitchen, the victims of the attack, were internationals is the kind of thing that attracts more attention. It certainly finally attracted the attention of President Biden. And that, of course, should concern us all, because every life should be considered of similar value, of great value, whether it's a Westerner or a Palestinian. And so you can draw conclusions. We certainly are concerned about the fact that it took this attack for there to be the kind of international outcry that we've seen, although, frankly, we do think it's warranted. There has been
a film made by 4 young directors, 2 Israeli and 2 Palestinian, has won Best Documentary at Germany's Berlinale Film Festival. It's a prestigious prize, and this was the moment that 2 of those directors, Israeli Yuval Abraham and Palestinian Basel Adra, went on stage to accept it.
I want to say we are standing in front of you now. Me and Basel are the same age. I am Israeli, Basel is Palestinian. And in 2 days, we will go back to a land where we are not equal. I am living under a civilian law, and Basel is under military law. We live 30 minutes from one another, but I have voting rights. Basel is not having voting rights. I'm free to move where I want in this land. Basel is, like millions of Palestinians, locked in the occupied West Bank. This situation of apartheid between us, this inequality, it has to end.
Very, very powerful call for equality. And it may be hard to believe that that call for equality has now led to outcry in Germany and Israel. The day after the speech, the Israeli ambassador to Germany called the entire festival into question, saying this: "Once again, the German cultural scene showcases its bias by rolling out the red carpet exclusively for artists who promote the delegitimization of Israel. At the Berlinale 2024, anti-Semitic and anti-Israel discourse was met with applause. It appears the lesson from Documenta hasn't sunk in. Under the guise of freedom of expression and art, anti-Semitic and anti-Israel rhetoric is celebrated. You don't need 7 professors to state the obvious. This is blatant anti-Semitic discourse. Cultural so-called leaders, your silence is deafening. It's time to raise your voices and reject this grotesque charade. Act now, or forever be part of this shameful legacy." And the mayor of Berlin also chimed in with this: "What happened yesterday at the Berlinale was an intolerable relativization. Anti-Semitism has no place in Berlin, and that also applies to the art scene. I expect the new management at the Berlinale to ensure that such incidents do not happen again." In Israel, Channel 11 aired that same 30-second clip of Yuval Abraham's speech, except underneath it, they displayed the chyron, "The Israeli filmmaker's anti-Semitic speech." That was not an anti-Semitic speech, right? Now, the reaction might not just be about the content of Abraham's speech. Of course, the film that he, Adra, and their 2 co-directors made is called No Other Land. It documents the relationship between Adra, a member of a Palestinian West Bank community that the IDF are trying to displace to make way for settlers, and Abraham, an Israeli journalist who tries to help. That story of Palestinian-Israeli cooperation and friendship is a pretty challenging one for Zionists, and the hysteria around it has led to direct consequences for Abraham too, who said this on Twitter: "A right-wing Israeli mob came to my family's home yesterday to search for me, threatening close family members who fled to another town in the middle of the night. I am still getting death threats and had to cancel my flight home. This happened after Israeli media and German politicians absurdly labeled my Berlinale award speech, where I called for equality between Israelis and Palestinians, a ceasefire and an end to apartheid, as anti-Semitic. The appalling misuse of this word by Germans, not only to silence Palestinian critics of Israel, but also to silence Israelis like me who support a ceasefire that will end the killing in Gaza and allow the release of Israeli hostages, empties the word anti-Semitism of meaning and thus endangers Jews all over the world. As my grandmother was born in a concentration camp in Libya, and most of my grandfather's family was murdered by Germans in the Holocaust, I find it particularly outraging that German politicians in 2024 have the audacity to weaponize this term against me in a way that endangered my family." He goes on, "But above all else, this behavior puts Palestinian co-director Basel Adra's life in danger, who lives under a military occupation surrounded by violent settlements in Masafer Yatta. He is in far greater danger than I am. If this is what you're doing with your guilt for the Holocaust, I don't want your guilt." Dalia, I mean, the Germans are really making fools of themselves on this particular issue, and I think that response from Yuval Abraham couldn't be more powerful.
I mean, it's been...
And then you've got the Israeli army, which I like to refer to as one of the best trained, best equipped, best fed terrorist organizations in the world. And yes, they have generals and they have nice uniforms, but their entire purpose is terrorism. And just as one example, I'll give you one example. Almost exactly 4 years ago, as Israel began its attack on Gaza, September the 27th, 2008, at 11:25 in the morning, what I refer to as the most shameful day in the Jewish history, the most shameful day in the history of the Jewish people. Israel began carpet bombing Gaza, and on the first day of what was to be a 21-day attack, they dropped 100 tons of bombs. Okay, a 1-ton bomb will decimate an entire city block. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. 800,000 children live in Gaza. 11:25 is exactly the time when the morning school shift and the afternoon school shift change. So all the kids are in the streets. All the children are on the streets. That was the moment decided by the decision makers in Israel to begin the attack.
This is a complex situation. It's 75 years ago. There is a statute of limitations on things like this, a moral statute of limitations. Move on. Establish yourselves in the countries that you left and went to. Get rid of these refugee camps. Get rid of UNRWA and become full citizens of the countries you moved to, the way my grandparents became full citizens of the United States
let me go
after pogroms had made them leave Poland.
Okay, come to Norman Finkelstein. Your response to that?
Okay, thank you, Piers. First of all, as a general point, I agree with the notion of a statute of limitations on your claims to a parcel of land. The first time I came across that expression was reading Arnold Toynbee's great history of the world, actually. And he makes the point in his history that isn't there a statute of limitation on the claims of Jews to Palestine? He said that claim was made 2,000 years ago. And it's claimed that, even today it's claimed.
And it's time that these shameless politicians are shamed publicly. Their hypocrisy exposed publicly.
Secretary of State, I mean, you've expressed outrage today and in recent days about the death of those 7 international aid workers. Eloquent outrage. But it begs the question. There have been hundreds of humanitarians killed in Gaza over the last 6 months. Dozens of journalists. Many people who have been waving white flags and have still been shot down by IDF forces. I mean, where was the outrage then? And why then didn't you offer to reshape American policy if necessary? Why only now? Is it just the passports of these 7 held?
So our Foreign Secretary David Cameron was in Washington today, where he met his American counterpart, Anthony Blinken, and both of them addressed media. And as usual, there were few questions from certain reporters about the situation in Gaza and the alarming cases of humanitarian crisis. So, first of all, both these gentlemen, they appeared very keen to blame Hamas for everything. I mean, if their shamelessness has absolutely no end. Listen to them.
I would just make the point that ultimately the people responsible for holding these hostages are Hamas. They could release the hostages now. I'm not involved in the minutiae of the negotiations, but I know, very big offers have been made by Israel to release loads of prisoners from their prisons in response to hostages being released. And, we need the hostages to come home. We need the aid to get in, and it's Hamas more than anyone else that are standing in the way of that happening.
We have our teams working on this 24/7. We're working, as you know, closely with Qatar, with Egypt, with Israel. Bill Burns has been doing extraordinary work on this. Many of us have been deeply engaged, working with the governments in question. We have an offer that's on the table now to Hamas that is very serious and should be accepted. Hamas could move forward with this immediately and get a ceasefire that would benefit people throughout Gaza, as well as, of course, get the hostages home. I think the fact that it continues to not say yes is a reflection of what it really thinks about the people of Gaza, which is not much at all. It's also extraordinary the extent to which Hamas has been almost erased from this story. As we both said, going back almost to day one, none of what we've seen in Gaza would have happened had Hamas given up the hostages right away, put down its weapons, stopped hiding behind civilians, and surrendered. It has an opportunity now to agree to the proposal on a ceasefire and on hostages. The ball is in Hamas's court. The world is watching to see what it does.
What had happened is that both of them addressed the media, and then there were certain reporters, 4 of them actually, was selected to ask questions. First one was a lady from CBS. Second one was a lady from Financial Times. Third one was from a gentleman from BBC. And
the Western Empire is not spreading liberalism. They are crushing liberty, freedom, democracy everywhere they go. The United States has special ops forces, meaning intelligence and military operations, in more countries than they have embassies. The U.S. has carried out at least 469 military interventions since 1798, but more than half of those have been carried out in just the last 30 years. They are spreading neoliberalism, not liberalism. And these two ideologies couldn't be more different. And they're not spreading it by discourse and dialogue in the so-called marketplace of ideas. They're spreading it through force and violence on a scale unparalleled in human history. And you can go back as far as you want, or as recently as you want. If you want to go as far as Nagasaki, Hiroshima, you can go there. If you want to go to slavery, you can go there. If you want to go to the genocide of the Native Americans, you can go there. And if you want to just talk more recently, you can talk about Iraq. You can talk about Afghanistan. You can talk about Syria. You can talk about Yemen. You can talk about drone attacks in Pakistan. You can talk about bombing the pharmaceutical factory in Sudan. And that's just against us. Forget about talking about Latin America in the 1970s, 1980s, and now. They're spreading it through military invasion, occupation, and intimidation, and through economic sabotage, bullying, and debt slavery. The Muslim world and the entire global South see it. They know it. They experience it. They are suffering from it. Nobody is fooled by the propaganda. The West is not teaching the world, certainly not the Muslim world, about the value of individual liberty or the sacredness of the individual or about the rule of law or any of the other principles that are associated with liberalism. We have to fight the West in order to establish these principles in our societies. And these are principles that we understood centuries before the Enlightenment. You must have had your head buried in the amber waves of grain if you actually imagine that the West invented or discovered the concept of individual rights and civil liberties and freedom. The people in the West are allowed to do as they please. They're allowed to fornicate, they're allowed to drink, they're allowed to commit sodomy, they're allowed to play games about what gender is, they're allowed to indulge in absolute moral relativism, precisely because they are inconsequential to those in power. Your only role in the society is to contribute to corporate profits, to be a consumer and to be a worker. That's all. Therefore, anything else you want to do with your life doesn't matter to anyone who matters. Liberalism is a euphemism for the complete irrelevance of the morality, the decency, or the refinement of the population, because you don't matter. If your immorality and your indecency is profitable, it's approved. Nobody cares about you being a good person because you don't have any power. And what you call liberalism, which is actually just the complete indifference of power to the lives of the population, yes, this has wrought havoc on the societies. And this havoc is profitable. And it helps to consolidate the power of those who possess power because the population
continue to resist. We drop all pretense of our civilizing mission and unleash, as in Gaza, an orgy of slaughter and destruction. We become drunk on violence. We kill with reckless ferocity. We become the beasts we accuse the oppressed of being. We expose the lie of our vaunted moral superiority. We expose the fundamental truth about Western civilization. We are the most ruthless and efficient killers on the planet. This alone is why we dominate the wretched of the earth. It has nothing to do with democracy or freedom or liberty. These are rights we never intend to grant to the oppressed. Honor, justice, compassion, and freedom are ideas that have no converts, Joseph Conrad reminds us. There are only people without knowing, understanding, or feelings who intoxicate themselves with words, repeat words, shout them out, imagining they believe them, without believing in anything else but profit, personal advantage, and their own satisfaction.
यूनिवर्सल टेलीविजन को सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें। उसके बाद बेल बटन पे क्लिक करें और अपने कमेंट्स के सेक्शन में अपने कीमती जो ख्यालात का इजहार ज़रूर